I never thought my life would fall apart in the span of a few months. Everything I'd worked for, my marriage, my family, my trust in people, came crashing down like a house of cards. And at the center of it all was the person I least expected, my own brother. Tom and I were always close growing up. Being just 2 years apart, we were practically inseparable. He was the outgoing one, always the life of the party, while I was more reserved, the one who got things done. I admired his charm, his ability to make people laugh. But as we got older, that carefree charm started to wear thin. He had a way of drifting from job to job, woman to woman, never taking life too seriously. Still, he was my brother, and I always had his back. After I married Rachel, things changed. I had responsibilities, a stable job, and dreams of starting a family. Tom, meanwhile, stayed in the same pattern, chasing thrills, rarely holding down a steady relationship. When he hit a rough patch last year, losing his job and his place to stay, I didn't hesitate to offer him our spare room. Rachel was supportive of the idea, though she had her reservations. "I just hope he doesn't bring any of his chaos into our lives," she said one night as we lay in bed. "Nah, he's just going through a rough patch," I assured her. "He'll get back on his feet." It started off fine, better than expected. Tom got along well with Rachel, maybe too well in hindsight. They shared a similar sense of humor, always laughing and chatting at dinner, while I worked late hours. I didn't think much of it. Tom was my brother after all, and Rachel was my wife. What could go wrong? As the weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle changes. Rachel seemed distant, often distracted. She'd stay up late, scrolling through her phone, or making vague excuses about needing space. I figured it was just a rough patch in our marriage. Every couple goes through it, right? I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, so I let it go. Then one night, everything changed. Rachel had been complaining of feeling nauseous for a few days, and I assumed it was a stomach bug. But when I came home from work one evening, she was sitting on the couch, pale and trembling, clutching a pregnancy test. It was positive. I was shocked, of course, but also overjoyed. We had talked about starting a family, and even though we hadn't been actively trying, the idea of becoming a father was something I'd always dreamed about. "I can't believe it," I said, pulling her into a hug. "We're going to be parents." But Rachel didn't look happy. She didn't return the hug. Instead, she pulled away, her eyes welling up with tears. "Matt, there's something I need to tell you." My stomach tightened. The way she looked at me, the guilt in her eyes, made my heart sink. I tried to prepare myself for whatever was coming next, but nothing could have braced me for what she said. "I don't know if the baby is yours." The words hit me like a freight train. I stood there frozen, trying to make sense of what she'd just said. "What do you mean you don't know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I made a mistake, Matt. I slept with someone else." My mind raced and struggling to keep up. "Who?" I demanded, feeling the anger rising in my chest. "Who was it?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Her lips quivered as she whispered the name that shattered my world. "Tom." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. It felt like I had been punched in the gut, leaving me breathless. "Tom? My brother?" The words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't fully process them. There was no way, no possible way, that the person I trusted most in this world had done this to me. I stared at Rachel, hoping, praying that she would take it back, tell me it was a sick joke, or that I'd misunderstood her. But the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She was serious, and that realization hit me harder than anything. You slept with Tom?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Rachel nodded, her face crumpling under the weight of her guilt. "I'm so sorry, Matt. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake, a stupid, horrible mistake." I stepped back, needing space, my mind reeling. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what she had just told me. How could my own brother betray me like this? How could Rachel, my wife, do something so devastating? "When?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I'd ever heard it. Rachel winced at my tone but didn't try to soften the blow. "A couple of months ago, when you were working late all the time. I don't know, and things between us were tense, and I was feeling lonely. One night after we had a few drinks, it just happened." "That's it? You were feeling lonely? So you turned to my brother?" I snapped, anger boiling inside me. "How could you do this to me, Rachel?" Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain herself, but nothing she said made sense. Nothing could justify what she had done. She told me it had only happened once, that it was a mistake she regretted immediately, but her words fell flat. How could I believe anything she said now? And the baby? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal. You don't know if it's mine or his? Rachel shook her head, biting her lip as more tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know, Matt. I wish I could tell you, but I don't know. My chest tightened as the full impact of her confession settled in. This was more than just an affair. This was about my family, my future. Everything I had ever wanted being ripped apart in the cruelest way possible. There was a chance that the child Rachel was carrying wasn't mine at all, but my brother's. A man I had trusted, supported, and loved my entire life. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of there, to escape the suffocating walls of our home, the very place where all of this had unraveled. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring Rachel's sobs behind me. I grabbed my keys and left the house, not even sure where I was going. My body moved on autopilot, driving aimlessly through the city streets, my thoughts racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. How had this happened? How had my life spiraled out of control so quickly? Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot and sat there in the silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing holding me together. The anger, the shock, the confusion, it all churned inside me like a storm, threatening to consume me whole. And at the center of that storm was Tom. Tom, who had been my best friend, my confidant, the one person I thought I could count on no matter what. He had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The man who I had let into my home, who I had helped, had gone behind my back and slept with my wife. I needed answers. I couldn't just sit here drowning in my own thoughts. I needed to hear it from him. I needed to know how he could do something so unforgivable. With a surge of determination, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. The phone rang twice before Tom picked up, his voice casual and carefree, completely unaware of the devastation he had caused. Hey, bro, what's up? He asked. The sound of his voice sent a wave of fury through me. I clenched my teeth, barely able to contain the rage that was boiling beneath the surface. We need to talk. Now. Tom must have sensed the seriousness in my voice because his tone shifted instantly. Sure. Everything okay? I didn't bother answering. Meet me at the park near my place in 10 minutes. I hung up without waiting for a response, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove to the park, all I could think about was the confrontation that was about to happen. Tom had ruined my life, destroyed my marriage, and possibly fathered a child with my wife. And I needed to hear from him why he had done it. When I arrived at the park, the night air was cool and the streets were quiet. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to calm the storm inside me. But the anger was too strong. There was no calming it now. A few minutes later, I saw Tom's car pull up. He got out looking confused but concerned as he walked toward me. I got out of my car, fists clenched at my sides, my pulse pounding in my ears. Matt, what's going on? Tom asked, his face a mix of confusion and worry. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice cold and hard. You slept with Rachel? Tom froze, the casual smile he'd had when he stepped out of the car instantly fading. His face paled, and for a moment, he didn't say anything, just stood there, mouth slightly open, as if he was trying to process what I had just said. What are you talking about? He stammered, taking a small step back, like he needed to put distance between us. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I shot back, my voice sharp with anger. Rachel told me. She told me everything. You slept with her, Tom. You betrayed me. Tom's eyes widened in panic, his hands coming up in a defensive gesture. Matt, I didn't mean for it to happen, I swear. It was a mistake. We were both drunk, and it just happened. I never wanted to hurt you. His words only stoked the fire inside me. My brother, the person I'd trusted more than anyone, had slept with my wife, and now he was standing in front of me, trying to explain it away like it was some unfortunate accident. My fists clenched at my sides, and I had to resist the urge to swing at him right then and there. You didn't want to hurt me? I spat, taking a step toward him. You slept with my wife, Tom. How the hell did you think this would end? I know, Tom said, his voice trembling. I messed up, okay? I messed up bad. I wasn't thinking. It was just, we were both feeling low, and we'd had a few drinks, and I'm sorry, Matt. I'm so sorry. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was acting like this was just some momentary lapse in judgment, like that made everything okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. I don't want your apology, I said through gritted teeth. I want to know why. Why would you do this to me? You were living in my house for God's sake. I was helping you get back on your feet, and this is how you repay me. Tom flinched at my words, and for the first time, he looked genuinely ashamed. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the ground as he struggled to find the right words. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel and we got close. I don't know how it happened, but one night after you left for work, we had a few drinks and things got out of control. It was a mistake, Matt. A terrible mistake. I wanted to scream, to punch him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But instead I stood there, my whole body shaking with rage, trying to keep myself from completely losing it. And the baby? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Rachel's pregnant, Tom. There's a chance that it's yours. At that, Tom's face went even paler, and I saw the fear in his eyes. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't even considered the possibility that he might have fathered a child with his own brother's wife. Oh God, he muttered, running his hands through his hair again, his expression one of total panic. Matt, I swear, I didn't know. I didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't know either until today, I snapped. But now that she is, what are you going to do about it? Tom looked like he was about to pass out. He glanced around as if searching for some escape, but there was none. He was trapped, just like I was, trapped in the consequences of his own actions. I don't know, he said finally, his voice shaky. What am I supposed to do? If it's mine, I'll take responsibility. I'll do whatever I can to make things right. Make things right? I laughed bitterly. You think there's any way to make this right? You've already destroyed my marriage, my family. You've ruined everything, Tom. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, I turned away, too disgusted to look at him anymore. I couldn't deal with this right now. I needed space, time to think, time to figure out how my entire life had fallen apart so quickly. I need you out of my house, I said, my voice cold. I don't care where you go, but you can't stay there anymore. I'll figure out what to do about Rachel and the baby. But I don't want to see you again. Do you understand? Matt, please. Tom started, but I cut him off. Get out, Tom. We're done. I didn't wait for him to respond. I got into my car, slammed the door, and drove off, leaving him standing in the park, alone. My mind was spinning, my heart pounding as I sped through the darkened streets, trying to outrun the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I had always thought that family was the one thing you could count on, that no matter what happened, your brother would always have your back. But now the person I had trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I was left wondering if I'd ever be able to rebuild the life they had shattered. When I got back home, the house felt like a completely different place. Cold, suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on me as I stepped inside. Rachel was still on the couch, staring blankly at the floor, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The sight of her only reignited the storm of anger and betrayal that had been swirling inside me since her confession. She looked up when she heard me come in, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but I didn't want to hear it. Not now. Not after everything I had just learned from Tom. I talked to him, I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion. He admitted it. Rachel's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Matt, I don't want to hear it, I snapped, cutting her off. I didn't have the energy for more apologies, more excuses. You and Tom, you've both done enough talking. I moved past her and headed upstairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway leading to our bedroom felt longer, like I was walking toward the end of something I couldn't avoid. I opened the door to our room, the room we had shared for years, the room that was supposed to be our safe space, and all I could think about was how tainted it felt now. I threw my keys on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The silence in the house was deafening. The weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to scream, to punch a hole in the wall, to do something to release the pain and anger that was threatening to consume me. But instead, I just sat there, numb, trying to process how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I had been living a lie. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my brother, my future, it was all gone. And now I had to face the reality that my wife might be carrying my brother's child. I felt sick. My stomach twisted in knots as I thought about it. How was I supposed to raise a child knowing it could be the result of my wife's betrayal? How was I supposed to move forward knowing that the person I had built my life with had destroyed it in the blink of an eye? Rachel's soft footsteps echoed from the hallway, and a moment later she appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, and she looked like she had aged years in just the few hours since her confession. But I didn't care. I couldn't bring myself to feel anything for her except anger. "Matt," she began, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you in the worst possible way, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." Her words sounded hollow, like she was saying what she thought she should say, not what she truly felt. I turned to look at her, my expression hard. "Love?" I scoffed bitterly. "You think what you did was love? You destroyed everything we had, Rachel. You and Tom, both of you have ruined my life." She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself as if she was trying to protect herself from my words. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. I don't want to lose you, Matt. I can't. You lost me the moment you slept with him," I said coldly. "There's no coming back from this." She took a few steps closer, her eyes pleading. "Please, Matt, we can get through this. We can figure it out. We can take a paternity test and—" I cut her off again, the mention of the baby making my blood boil. "And what? What if it's his? What then, Rachel? Do you expect me to raise my brother's child and pretend everything's fine? Do you honestly think I could ever look at you the same way?" Rachel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't know, Matt. I don't know. I'm so sorry. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. Please, we can fix this." Her words were like needles, stabbing into the raw wound that was my heart. But the truth was, there was no us anymore. Not after this. "I need space," I said, my voice quieter now but still laced with anger. "I need to figure out what I'm going to do next, but for now, I want you to leave." Rachel's sobs grew louder, and she shook her head in desperation. "Matt, please, don't make me go. Let me stay. We can talk this through. I'll do anything." "I said leave," I shouted, unable to contain my fury any longer. "Go stay with a friend. Go stay with Tom for all I care. But get out of this house. I can't even look at you right now." Rachel recoiled at my outburst, her face crumpling as she realized there was no convincing me. She turned and walked out of the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway as she hurried to pack her things. I sat on the bed, my head in my hands, listening to the sound of her gathering her things. Each slam of a drawer, each zip of a bag, driving home the reality that our marriage was over. When the front door finally closed behind her, the house fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. The anger I had been clinging to for hours started to fade, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I didn't know how to move forward from here. Everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, had been destroyed in a single night. And now I was left with nothing but questions, questions that had no answers. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay here. Not in this house. Not in the place that had become a constant reminder of my wife's betrayal and my brother's treachery. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with the shattered pieces of my life. After Rachel left, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. I thought the silence would be a relief, a break from the chaos, but instead it pressed down on me, making every second stretch longer than the last. The weight of the betrayal felt heavier in that silence, as if without the noise, I couldn't escape the thoughts swirling in my mind. I couldn't sit there anymore. I grabbed my jacket and keys and walked out the door, not sure where I was heading, but knowing I couldn't stay inside those four walls for another minute. The night air was cool and the streets were quiet, almost eerily so. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring past me as my mind replayed everything. Rachel's confession, Tom's pathetic excuses, the possibility that I could be raising his child. The thought was unbearable. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. Every time I imagined holding that baby, a part of me felt sick, knowing it could be a product of my brother's betrayal. And if the baby was mine, how could I raise a child with someone I no longer trusted? Eventually, I found myself at a bar I used to frequent before Rachel and I got married. It was a dingy, quiet place, nothing fancy, but it was familiar. It felt like a safe place to disappear for a few hours. I walked in, the smell of stale beer and cigarettes hitting me instantly, and made my way to the bar. "What'll it be?" the bartender asked, giving me a quick glance. Whiskey. Double, I replied, my voice flat. The drink came quickly, and I downed it faster than I probably should have. The burn of the alcohol was a welcome distraction, numbing the edges of my anger and pain, if only for a moment. I ordered another and then another, letting the alcohol drown out the thoughts that wouldn't stop racing through my mind. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, drinking in silence, but the next thing I knew, someone was sitting next to me. I didn't look up at first, too lost in my thoughts to care, but then I heard a familiar voice. Rough night? I glanced to my right and saw Lisa, an old friend from college. We hadn't talked much in the past few years, but seeing her brought back a flood of memories from simpler times, before marriage, before life got so complicated. She looked the same, with her sharp features and dark hair, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there back in our wild, carefree days. You could say that, I muttered, taking another sip of my drink. Lisa raised an eyebrow, giving me a half smile. You look like you've been through hell. Something like that, I said, not really wanting to dive into the mess that my life had become. But Lisa wasn't one to let things go. She leaned in slightly, her expression shifting from casual to concerned. You want to talk about it? I stared down at my glass, the whiskey swirling in the dim light of the bar. Part of me didn't want to open up, didn't want to lay everything bare to someone who hadn't been a part of my life in years. But another part of me, the part that had been holding everything in since Rachel's confession, just needed to get it out. I found out my wife's pregnant, I said, my voice bitter. Lisa smiled at first, misunderstanding the situation. Congrats. I didn't even know you guys were trying. We weren't, I interrupted, the words sharper than I intended. And there's a chance the baby isn't mine. Lisa blinked, clearly taken aback. She set down her drink, her expression shifting to one of confusion. Wait, what? Rachel cheated on me. With my brother. The words felt heavy, like they were being pulled out of me. Saying them out loud made everything feel even more real, more painful. And now she's pregnant, and we don't know whose kid it is. Lisa's eyes widened in shock, her hand covering her mouth. Jesus, Matt, I don't even know what to say. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, me neither. We sat in silence for a few moments, the noise of the bar fading into the background. I could feel Lisa's eyes on me, trying to process what I had just told her. Eventually she spoke, her voice softer now. That's insane. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how you're feeling right now. Like I'm drowning, I admitted, the alcohol loosening my tongue. I don't know what to do. My marriage is over. My relationship with Tom is done. And this baby, if it's his, I don't even know how to handle that. Lisa reached out and placed her hand on mine, a small gesture of comfort. You don't have to figure it all out right now. You've been hit with something huge, and it's going to take time. But you don't have to go through it alone, you know. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Her words were kind, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. But even as she spoke, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me again. The betrayal, the lies, the uncertainty of the future. It was all too much. I appreciate that, I said quietly, pulling my hand away gently. But right now, I just need to figure out how to breathe. Lisa nodded, understanding in her eyes. Just take it one step at a time, Matt. And don't let them take everything from you. You deserve better. Her words lingered as we sat there, the weight of my situation hanging between us. I knew she was right. I couldn't let this destroy me, but knowing that and actually living it were two very different things. After a while, I finished my drink and stood up, feeling the alcohol settling into my system. I should get going. Lisa stood up too, giving me a small smile. Take care of yourself, Matt. And seriously, if you need anything, call me. I nodded, appreciating the offer, but unsure if I'd actually take her up on it. As I left the bar and stepped into the cool night air, the weight of everything I'd been holding back felt even heavier. I needed to figure out what came next, but all I could think about was how broken my life had become. As I drove back toward the house, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Rachel. Please come home. We need to talk. The sight of her name on my phone filled me with a mix of anger and exhaustion. I didn't want to deal with her. I didn't want to deal with any of it, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to make a decision. I stared at Rachel's text for what felt like an eternity, the words, please come home, blurring in front of my eyes. Part of me wanted to throw my phone out the window, ignore her, and disappear for a while. But I knew that wasn't an option. Not really. Sooner or later, I had to face this mess head on. The drive back to the house was slow, the alcohol in my system dulling my senses, but not enough to block out the anger simmering beneath the surface. As much as I wanted to avoid Rachel, there was no escaping the situation. The conversation we'd had earlier had left too much unresolved, too many loose ends, and as much as I hated it, we needed to talk. When I pulled into the driveway, Rachel's car was parked outside, and the lights inside the house were still on. I sat in the car for a moment, gathering myself, preparing for whatever was about to happen. I didn't know what she wanted to say or how I would even respond, but I had to go in. I couldn't run from this forever. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of our home hitting me like a wave. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stranger's house, like I didn't belong there. And in a way, I didn't. Not after what had happened. Rachel was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap, her face streaked with dried tears. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her expression filled with guilt and pain. She didn't say anything at first, and neither did I. The tension in the room was thick, the weight of everything we hadn't said hanging between us. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "Thank you for coming back." I didn't respond, just stood there, waiting for her to say whatever she had called me back for. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, and I wasn't sure I had the energy for another emotional conversation. But Rachel clearly had more to say. "I know you hate me right now," she began, her voice trembling. "And I don't blame you. I hate myself too. What I did, what happened with Tom, it was the worst mistake of my life. And I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough." "You're right," I said coldly, crossing my arms. "It's not enough." She flinched at my words, but she didn't look away. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Matt. I don't even know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself. But I need you to understand that it meant nothing. It was a moment of weakness, a stupid, horrible mistake. I love you. I always have." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my temper in check. "You say that, but you still slept with my brother. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" Rachel wiped at her eyes, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I don't know. I don't have any excuses. I was feeling lonely, disconnected from you. And Tom, he was just there. But that's not an excuse for what I did. I know I hurt you, and I know I've destroyed everything. But I love you, Matt. I love us. I don't want to lose you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. But I wasn't moved. I couldn't be. My trust in her was shattered, and no amount of apologies could change that. Still, there was something I needed to know, something I had to address before I could even think about what came next. "And the baby?" I asked, my voice low. "What if it's Tom's?" Rachel bit her lip, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know whose it is. I wish I could tell you for sure, but I can't." The thought twisted my stomach into knots again. I had spent hours trying to wrap my head around the idea that the child she was carrying might not be mine, and I still couldn't process it. How could I? The very thought of raising a child that might be my brother's was almost unbearable. "We'll get a paternity test as soon as we can," she continued, her voice shaky. "But until then, Matt, I don't want to make any decisions until we know for sure. I don't want to throw everything away if there's a chance. I can't do this, Rachel." I cut her off, my voice barely above a whisper. "Even if the baby is mine, I don't know if I can stay. You've destroyed everything I thought we had. I don't even recognize you anymore." Her face crumpled, and she broke down into sobs, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "Please, Matt," she cried. "Please don't say that. We can work through this. We can go to therapy. We can figure this out together. I can't lose you." Her words cut through me like a knife, but not in the way she intended. They didn't stir up feelings of forgiveness or hope. They only made me realize how far gone everything was. I didn't feel the connection to her that I once had. Instead, all I felt was anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sense of loss. "I need space," I said, my voice firm. "I can't make any decisions right now, but I know I can't stay here tonight." Rachel looked up at me, panic in her eyes. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," I replied, turning away from her. "But I can't be here right now. I'll let you know what I decide. But for now, I just need to be away from all of this." Without waiting for her response, I walked out the door, closing it behind me with a finality that sent a chill through my spine. I didn't know where I was heading, but I knew that staying in that house, surrounded by the memories of our life together, was too much for me to handle right now. As I drove through the empty streets, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced down, half expecting another text from Rachel, but it wasn't her. It was Tom. I hesitated, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. The last thing I wanted was to talk to him, but something told me I needed to hear what he had to say. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and opened the message. Matt, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, but there's something you need to know. I didn't want to tell you this way, but I have no choice. Call me. A knot formed in my stomach as I read the message. What could he possibly have to say that I didn't already know? What more could he do to me after what he had already taken? Against my better judgment, I dialed his number. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice tense and serious. Matt, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something about the baby. What is it, Tom? I asked, my patience wearing thin. You've already done enough damage. What more could you possibly have to say? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear him taking a deep breath, as if he was bracing himself. I need to tell you the truth about why this happened, he said quietly. Why Rachel and I, why everything happened the way it did. There's something you don't know, something I should have told you from the beginning. A chill ran down my spine, the unease in his voice cutting through the fog of my anger. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded. What are you hiding? Tom's voice wavered as he spoke, and what he said next shattered everything I thought I knew. Matt, I think I'm sterile. The world seemed to tilt as Tom's words echoed through the phone. Sterile, I repeated, my voice flat, as if the word didn't make sense in the context of everything that had happened. I know it sounds insane, but I've known for a while. I found out years ago, Tom explained, his voice trembling. I didn't want to tell anyone. I guess I didn't know how to handle it. I was embarrassed, ashamed, but after what happened with Rachel, I couldn't keep lying. I don't think I can father a child, Matt. There's no way the baby is mine. My mind raced trying to process what he was saying. If Tom was telling the truth, and I had no reason to believe he wasn't, then everything I had feared, all the anger and betrayal that had been boiling inside me for days, was suddenly upended. How do you know? I asked, my voice a mix of disbelief and cautious curiosity. How can you be sure? Tom sighed, and I could hear the regret in his voice. I had some issues a few years back. The doctors ran tests, and that's when they told me. There's an extremely low chance I could ever have kids, like almost impossible. But I didn't tell anyone because, well, I guess I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't have kids. I felt the anger in me shift, twisting into something else. Confusion, frustration, maybe even pity. But mostly I felt overwhelmed. Could this really be true? Could everything I had been through over the last few days, the heartache, the betrayal, the uncertainty about the baby's paternity, have been for nothing? Why didn't you say anything earlier? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why wait until now? After everything? I was scared, Tom admitted, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to think I was trying to make excuses. I know I still messed up. What I did with Rachel was unforgivable, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I couldn't let you think the baby might be mine when there's almost no chance it could be. I sat there in stunned silence, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of his confession sank in. This changed everything. If what Tom said was true, then the baby Rachel was carrying was mine. I was going to be a father, and the very thing that had driven a wedge between us, Tom's possible paternity, wasn't even a factor. Matt? Tom's voice was hesitant. I know this doesn't fix anything. I know what I did can't be undone, but I thought you needed to know the truth. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words, but nothing felt right. I was still furious with him, still disgusted by what he had done. His betrayal had destroyed my marriage and shattered my trust. But now, there was something else to consider. Something bigger. Thanks for telling me, I said finally, my voice hollow. But this doesn't change what you did, Tom. You crossed a line, and we're not coming back from that. You might not be the father, but that doesn't make this any easier. I know, Tom said quietly, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted to give you the truth. I hung up without saying goodbye, my mind spinning as I sat in the car. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. The revelation about Tom's sterility was still sinking in, but it didn't erase the betrayal I had felt. It didn't fix my marriage, but it did change one thing: the baby. If there was almost no chance it was Tom's, then that meant the child Rachel was carrying was mine. Suddenly, a wave of emotion crashed over me. The anger and confusion gave way to something unexpected: fear. I was going to be a father. This baby, the one I had been dreading, wasn't the result of my brother's affair. It was my child, and that meant I had to make some decisions about what came next. With a deep breath, I started the car and headed back to the house. The drive was quiet, the weight of everything heavy in the air. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, but I felt different. My anger hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. The pain of betrayal was still there, but now there was something more important at stake. When I walked in, Rachel was still on the couch, her eyes wide and puffy from crying. She looked up at me, fear and hope flickering across her face. "What did Tom say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "He told me he's sterile." Rachel's face went pale and her mouth dropped open in shock. "What?" "He can't have kids. The baby, it's not his, Rachel. It's mine." Rachel burst into tears, her hands shaking as she covered her face. "Oh my God, Matt, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." I stood there unsure of what to say. The betrayal still hung between us like a thick fog, but now there was something bigger than our pain, something we couldn't ignore. "I'm going to be a father," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Rachel nodded, still sobbing, her shoulders trembling with the weight of everything that had happened. "Yes, yes, you are." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence filled with the enormity of what was happening. My mind was still reeling, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't make any decisions about our marriage tonight. Everything was too raw, too fractured. But I did know one thing. No matter what happened between Rachel and me, I was going to be a father, and that was something I couldn't turn away from. "I need time," I said, my voice steady. "I don't know if we can fix this, Rachel, but I need to focus on the baby. I'm going to be there for my child. That's the only thing I know for sure right now." Rachel nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I understand, Matt. I'll give you space, whatever you need. Just thank you for coming back." I didn't respond. I walked past her and headed upstairs, feeling the weight of fatherhood settling on my shoulders, along with the remnants of a marriage that had been irreparably damaged. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I didn't know what the future held for me, for Rachel or for my relationship with my brother. But I knew that I had a child on the way, and that, above all else, would guide my next steps.